Hey everyone listening, trying to find direction and move with intention. Welcome to Moving with Intention, a podcast by Black Sheep Coaching. We hope the episode you're about to listen to is empowering, insightful, and helpful. We hope you're moving with intention in your life and taking actions, as small as they may be, towards becoming the person you want to be and living the life you want to live. Disclaimer: this podcast may contain discussion of sensitive topics that may trigger some individuals. Listener discretion is advised. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health professionals or resources, and we encourage you to seek those out should you need them. Welcome to Moving with Intention, where today we're going to discuss needs and wants. Now, this is going to be a very nuanced discussion, and I think my definition of needs and wants might be a little different from others, but I'd like to share some of my mindset, some of my techniques, and some of the skills I've learned along my journey of improving my life and finding purpose and fulfillment. And I hope that these skills and techniques might assist you in your lives. So when we talk about needs, and I've had this discussion with many people, but when we talk about needs, people tend to define those as some of our biological and physiological needs. So things like, eating and food and water and shelter, those tend to be the things that come up. But I think as human beings, we're a little bit more complex than that. I think a lot of us have a need for social interaction, belonging, community, love, care. I think it's hard to feel fulfilled without those. Uh, that's my personal opinion, but I think there are um, various studies that show that human beings are social creatures. So when we talk about needs, that definition can be expanded to, things that bring us fulfillment and joy and sense of community and belonging and care. In addition to those, basic survival needs. So when we talk about needs, I think for me, the way I define it is it's hard to define, but I think anything that will bring you joy, fulfillment, or better your life. I think that's a need for most. And I think the definition can be pretty malleable. And I think a need is very individualized, it's very subjective, it's very contextual, and it's shaped by our culture, our upbringing. It's shaped by our experience and it's shaped by our lens and perspective. So, for example, one need I have that illustrates this is there are days where I feel I absolutely 100% need a can of Coca-Cola. Now, why is that? I think a lot of people push back on this and say, well, technically you don't need it. And, technically you're right. But from my perspective, there are days where I go to bed late. I might be tired. I might have had a lot of stuff on my plate. Maybe I'm stressed and didn't get the best night's sleep. And I go into work the next day. And there are things that I just need to get done because if I don't, I might get talked to. There might be conflict. I might lose my job. And that's not something that I want. And it's not something that I need because if that happens, I'm probably going to lose my apartment. So I always have to weigh the risk. Now, that can of Coke sometimes gets me through a day, so I identify it as a need for myself. And that caffeine and that stimulant, I think, is a need for a lot of people. I think studies show that 90% of Americans have a caffeinated beverage per day. I think caffeine is the most popular drug in our society. And I think people use that as a stimulant, cups of coffee just to get through their workday. So when we talk about needs, I identify as things we need to do. Otherwise, we have this domino effect of negative consequence. So this question of, do I want to do this? Do I need to do this? It's something that comes up a lot for me in my day to day. And this is the technique I use is asking myself that question. If it comes to somebody asking me to go out for dinner, I'll ask myself, do I need to do this? And in some cases, the answer is yes, because when I evaluate that, it's like, Well, I haven't been out with them for a while. I do want to foster this friendship or this relationship. I need to get out a little more and socialize. So, yes, this is a need for me, right? Now, if they ask me to go to dinner 3 nights in a row, I might want to, but at the same time, do I need to go 3 times in a row? Probably not. So, this is a question I ask myself daily about a lot of things is this a need or a want? And I think where people trip up is that sometimes we conflate needs with wants and wants with needs. Sometimes we need something and we think, oh, I just want to do this. I just want to go out. But if we're feeling that strong push and this very strong feeling that we want this thing so badly, maybe it's not a want anymore. Maybe it's become a need. And vice versa. Maybe there are things that we need, like, oh, one thing I've been thinking about is I want to buy a PS5. And I might say, "Oh, I need a PS5," but no, I really don't. But there might be a point where I'm just like, I'm bored. I need a new hobby. I'm not feeling as fulfilled. So maybe picking up a PS5 becomes a need because I need to feel that excitement, fulfillment, etc. So I know that's pretty nuanced, but what I found is in making various to-do lists, this technique, and this gets talked about among, performing circles and in life coaching, it gets talked about in, performance coaching, is the notion of having to-do lists and writing things down. And one technique I've tried is having 3 to-do lists, having a need to-do list, a want to-do list, and a don't need to-do list. And basically what I do is I'd write things in my need to do column, I would write things in my want to do column, and I'd write things in the don't need to do column. I would do everything I needed to do. My want to do's, I wouldn't do them. If I had things I needed to do, my want to do sat there. The don't need to do, that's an interesting one because I think this one, the reason this is recommended is because some of us are impulsive. Some of us have that knee jerk reaction, and some of us, there's just something that's bothering us that, oh, I need to get this done. It's this itch we want to scratch. But in doing so, we neglect things that are probably a higher priority or things that we've identified as higher priorities. But for some reason, because, maybe the kitchen's a little messy, it's getting on our nerves and, oh, I got to clean this, even though we might need to do X, Y, and Z. So these 3 to do lists, the need to do, want to do, and don't need to do, have been super pivotal in my life. And I used to write these things down. I would do everything on my need to do list. My want to do list, those would just sit there. And my don't need to do, they would sit there, but they were written down so I was aware of them. Hey, don't do this thing. Not right now, anyways. And the key with these lists were to constantly reevaluate, constantly reprioritize, constantly evaluate what's a need, what's a want. In moments there might be like 3 things I need to do, but after completing 1 or 2 of them, I might go, you know what? I'm going to slot in the need for rest here. I'm going to slot in the need to sit down and take a 30-minute break because I'm feeling tired. I'm feeling exhausted. This plays into awareness. This plays into knowing how we feel and being able to appropriately identify our needs and wants from moment to moment. I think this is what our society refers to as judgment. I think people who practice sound judgment are people who know how to properly evaluate their needs and wants and have the discipline to tackle their needs before their wants. What I found in my life is that when I neglect my needs, I'm ultimately unhappier. And when I neglect my needs, it sets off this domino effect of conflict. And conflict eventually can lead, or persistent conflict can eventually lead to unhappiness and to dissatisfaction. This notion of the to-do list, the 3 to-do lists, and reorganizing and adjusting, there might be times where there are things I need to do, and then Netflix is a want to do. I want to watch a movie. And at some point, I might say, you know what, that want to do, that's now become a need because I'm tired, I'm exhausted, it's late. Uh, Having a sit down and watching a movie might be fulfilling to me, provide some entertainment, provide some joy. And in some cases, that can be the little dopamine hit we talked about in the last episode, where we're tired, we're exhausted, we're fatigued, and then we go and have that little bit of, you know, watch one episode or watch one movie, and then we're good. You know, contrasted with a Netflix binge, which is probably like just dopamine, 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 excitement, 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 action, action, action. I think this notion of constantly evaluating needs and wants, reorganizing them and taking care of them, I think it plays into judgment, but ultimately I think the notion I'm discussing now is prioritization. We have sayings in our society, somebody has their ducks in a row or somebody has their priorities straight, get your priorities straight. I think when our priorities aren't straight, it's because we are tending to things we don't need to do. We are, um, overindulging in our wants. And because of that, our needs are neglected. And ultimately, we may neglect relationships, we may neglect our work, we may neglect other aspects of ourselves. And I think that leads to more dissatisfaction, as I previously mentioned. So, anyways, I'd like to challenge you all to try this technique, trying these three to-do lists: need to do, want to do, don't need to do. And also asking yourself when a situation arises, do I need to do this? Is this a battle I need to pick? Right? In some cases, the answer might be yes, because X, Y, Z. In some cases, it'd be like, no, I might feel the urge to pick this battle. I might feel the urge to push back here, but you know what? I'm making a decision for me that in this particular moment, no, I don't need to do that. So I'm going to forget about it. I'm just going to drop it, let it roll off my back. And I think in some cases that can be so beneficial. Now, don't confuse that with being passive, because if you identify a need to speak up about something, then I feel we should do so in a respectful way. But there are some things where we can just let that thing roll off my back. I don't really need to do this. I don't really need to respond to this. Is what it is, and move forward. So I'd like to challenge everyone listening to ask themselves these questions. Do I need to do this? Do I want to do this? And one technique you can use is ask yourself the question and count down from 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then listen to your inner talk. Listen to your self-talk. Listen to that knee-jerk gut feeling. Identify it. Identify that gut feeling. And then examine that gut feeling. How do you feel about it? In some cases, and in most cases for myself, I feel like humans are pretty intuitive. And in most cases, I feel our gut feeling is really the right one if we examine it. Now, I also know that some people can overthink, myself included. So sometimes we try to dismantle that feeling and try to deny it and try to find objections to it. And in some cases, we do. In some cases, our gut feeling may be wrong. But more often than not, I found that, you know, human intuition and gut feeling, it's a survival mechanism, and I think those have to be very strong in us. So, anyways, a little bit about needs and wants. I think it can be very nuanced, and remember, your needs are individualized, they're subjective. Whatever you identify as a need, if it's truly a need for you, then there's nothing wrong with that. And I think over time, as we work on our needs and tend to our needs, we find more time for wants, we find less conflict, we find more fulfillment, we find more happiness. And in doing so, I think we improve our lives. Being intentional about addressing our needs improves our lives, in my opinion. Anyways, thanks for listening. Hope you all enjoyed the episode. I'd like to thank you all for listening. A small reminder that you can find all our links on linktree/blacksheepcoaching. That's linktr.ee/blacksheepcoaching. It would also mean a lot if you could support the podcast by subscribing, liking, sharing, or becoming a patron on Patreon. I hope this episode assisted you in finding direction and moving with intention. And remember that big journeys start with small steps.